One of the most powerful ways to affect the visual language of an image is through vantage point. In the modern day, framing from different vantage points is almost trivial, with most cameras having flip-out screens or even remote viewing options. But of course that's not the case when it comes to analog cameras, where physical and technological limitations of the time led to compromise and specialization, with a camera often excelling at one vantage point but falling short with others. But there are some versatile solutions for the modern analog photographer looking to change their perspective. I'm David, and this is The Whole Picture. Creative framing is by no means a new concept. In fact, as soon as people began capturing images, it seems that they understood the power of vantage point. But just grasping the concept doesn't make it any easier to accomplish, so over the course of analog camera history, we've seen different innovations and solutions to aid in creative framing. Of course, we see this reflected in the variety of cameras developed over the years, including the TLR, that can help in changing one's perspective. But in reality, these cameras are all compromised in some way. And so, like with many things, to make cameras more versatile, we turn to accessories to fill in the gaps. In the first half of the 20th century, we saw shoe-mounted waistfinder accessories like these that generally fall into two categories. One, small mirror boxes with a proper, even, focusable lens like this septonflex, which features a design that's very reminiscent of the viewing lens on a twin lens camera. In both cases, the image is flipped horizontally, and what you see in the finder is going to be slightly higher than what your camera sees. Also, with no aperture, these finders always show a consistent, wide-open depth of field preview, which may not be the best representation of what your actual photo's depth of field will be. So the image on the focusing screen should be viewed more as a reference point and not a guarantee of results. There are some rare accessories and even camera systems like the view-arco, which feature coupled focusing between the taking lens and viewfinder lens, making for a more authentic TLR style experience. But for the majority of these finders, focusing on the viewing lens is not going to be coupled to the taking lens, which needs to be focused separately. That is one of the compromises of this category, and while these accessories do allow for more convenient framing from different vantage points, they're not always the most convenient nor the most accurate. Also, due to their vintage and design, the visibility of the preview image can be affected by ambient light. Too much direct light on the focusing screen can create a loss in contrast, while low light situations that might otherwise be visible to the human eye can be difficult to make out with these finders. Not to mention that light fall off is pretty common around the corners, even in the best lighting conditions. They also tend to be quite large, almost the size of some small cameras, but for all of their downsides, they do offer one of the largest windows to view your scene with this kind of accessory, and can even help accurately focus lenses for cameras that lack built-in focusing functionality. The second category of waistfinder accessories would be something like these reflecting finders from leitz. While this category of finders also implements mirrors, they're often of a more complex design, but they don't use traditional or focusable photographic lenses like the previous example. Instead, they simply reflect a portion of reality 90 degrees upwards based on the angle of view of the intended taking lens. This design means that there's no depth of field or focus preview, everything is going to be in focus all of the time. That compromise does allow for a significantly smaller, even pocketable finder design that tends to fare better in different lighting situations. But this in turn also means that your viewing window is going to be significantly smaller than most other examples of wastefinders. There are always trade-offs with these kinds of accessories, but the leitz has some practical benefits, like a crosshair style spirit level and excellent viewing angles. In fact, what I find very interesting about this category of finders is they tend to have an option for mounting them vertically. It might not seem like a game changer, but if you've ever tried to take a vertical photo with a waistfinder camera, you'll know how innovative and convenient this would have been. Between the small size, multiple viewing options, and the horizontally corrected image, I found these are very helpful for framing not just at waist level, but also a variety of vantage points. I also wanted to briefly mention another type of waistfinder accessory that design-wise is something of a mix between these two categories. Early folding cameras like those from Zeiss sometimes incorporated a 90-degree mirror-style finder, but being simple in design and often in proprietary mounts or built directly into the cameras themselves, I didn't feel like it merited its own category. Due to the era of these accessories, they typically show the angle of view of what was considered a normal lens, a 50mm on the full-frame 35mm format. At the time, lenses of around 50mm were the standard focal length for the majority of cameras, so it makes sense that most of these accessories would be designed to work with as many cameras as possible. Reflex finders like the septonflex were also probably limited to the 50mm focal length because of engineering constraints of the time. While wider angle lenses did exist in the early 20th century, they are more difficult and costly to manufacture, especially for a reflex system, and also significantly slower. So in theory, while it may have been possible to design a wide-angle reflex waist-level finder, it wouldn't have been the most practical accessory to use or manufacture at the time. On the other hand, reflecting 90-degree finders like those from Leitz that didn't require functional photographic optics could utilize less complex modifier lenses on a standard 50mm unit to offer 35mm and even 28mm angles of view. While this makes for a smoother manufacturing process and user experience, maybe due to the rarity of wide-angle lenses at the time, these accessories were only produced in a small number and can be quite rare collector's items today. We also see some contemporary examples of similar reflecting waist-level finders from Zeiss and other manufacturers for the 80 to 90mm focal lengths, and while not necessarily collector's items, they are less common than their 50mm variations. While these accessories were predominantly designed for 35mm cameras, interestingly, they typically feature a square viewing window with either masks or frame lines for both horizontal and vertically framed 2x3 images. This has a few probably unintentional upsides. One being that when taking 2x3 images with say 35mm or 6x9 medium format, you have slightly more room on the top and bottom of your frame to surveil your scene. This is similar to, but less effective than, what you see on say rangefinder cameras. But also the shape of the viewing window means these finders can be very effective for square format cameras like 6x medium format, as long as you don't mind the masks or frame lines. One downside of any shoe-mounted accessory, even more conventional eyepiece-style finders, is they can be very dependent on your camera. Some cameras have the shoe in an awkward place, while others don't have them at all. So these accessories are not perfect, but even today, they can help expand the functionality of cameras new and old that lack, say, flip-out screens, making framing from different vantage points a possibility where it might otherwise not be. But versatile waistfinder accessories are not limited to shoe mounts, and in the later half of the 20th century, the modular SLR would prove to be a very powerful photographic tool, especially when it came to vantage point. By simply swapping out the viewfinder on one of these cameras, photographers could take a traditional SLR and transform it into a waistfinder camera, allowing for more flexibility than ever before. And this really gave you the best of both worlds, allowing you to conveniently frame from different vantage points, but also with the accuracy of focusing and framing through the actual taking lens. Twin lens camera owners would also similarly get the option to swap out their sunshades for a reflex viewfinder, but this wasn't quite as versatile and accurate, still requiring the photographer to compensate for framing, among other drawbacks. Don't get me wrong, I do love a twin lens camera, and in general, their natural vantage point allows for some poetic and cinematic photos, but they aren't the most convenient or versatile, so I was always looking for a better option. And after using quite a few different cameras and accessories, I found myself gravitating towards the Leitz style reflecting finder. For one, I prefer 35mm lenses to 50s, so it does limit my options quite a bit. But more than that, I found that the size and shoe mount meant I could always leave it on my camera, but only use it when I needed it. This felt like the most flexible option, allowing me to use cameras in their intended way, but also frame more creatively at a moment's notice without needing to fiddle with accessories. And I even found the Leitz finder to be fantastic in conjunction with more traditional finders on custom cameras or box cameras like this Graflex XL-SW. And in general, I found the best results would come from using lenses with scale focus markings to take full advantage of these accessories. Anyways, I hope you liked the video and found it interesting or informative. I'd be very curious to hear other people's experience with accessories like these, especially if you have something that wasn't mentioned in the video. I'd love to know about it. I'm David, and this is The Whole Picture.